Think back to your teenage years, the rebellious spirit, the experimentation, those first steps into adult life. It's an integral part of growing up that everyone goes through. But sometimes, the adolescent period can become deadly, and not everyone survives it. In the lowland southern region of Oklahoma, USA, lies the small town of Waurika. This tiny community has a population of just 2,000, where everyone knows one another and life moves slowly and steadily. In the fall of 1996, one Waurika household was home to the rich family, Mother Gail, Father Dwayne, and their 4 children, 3 boys and a girl named Heather, who at the time of these events was a sophomore in high school. The heroine of this story was not only an excellent student but also a cheerleader. Heather had grown into a remarkably beautiful girl who drew attention wherever she went. She had a good nature but could also be quite fiery when it came to having fun. In her rebellious years, Heather wanted to try everything life had to offer. On the evening of October 2, 1996, an argument erupted between mother and daughter. The girl had racked up a phone bill of $300, which was a real blow to the family budget. The mother reproached Heather for her wastefulness, while the father was more restrained about the situation. The woman tried to explain to her daughter that she and her husband worked hard to earn money and couldn't afford to pay hundreds of dollars for phone calls every month. The thing was, at that time, the family was going through financial hardship. Heather's father, who worked as an electrician, had suffered severe burns during a transformer explosion. The man had nearly died and required prolonged treatment and skin grafts. He was unable to work and provide for the family, so his wife had to take on additional work to make ends meet. In this situation, every dollar earned counted, as expensive surgeries lay ahead for the father. The mother wanted to instill in her school-aged daughter a respect for money, for elders, and a desire to be self-sufficient. But the stubborn Heather wouldn't be persuaded, which again led to a serious argument. When things calmed down a bit, the girl was getting ready for bed. She went downstairs to her parents in the living room to say goodnight. After that, the daughter demonstratively, silently walked past her mother, showing her resentment. On this sad note, everyone went to their rooms. On the morning of October 3, the mother, as usual, woke everyone up for breakfast. But the daughter took a long time to respond. The woman chalked it up to yesterday's resentment and hoped that hunger would force Heather to come downstairs, but the girl stubbornly did not appear. When patience ran out, the mother went up to her daughter's room but was surprised to find it empty. In those days, cell phones were not yet widespread, so Heather didn't have one. The parents called all of the missing girl's friends, but none of them knew where Heather might be. Such behavior was totally unlike her. The girl did not suffer from mental disorders and had never run away from home before. Heather always took great care of herself and her appearance. She would never leave home for long without a change of clothes and makeup. But all her things were left at home. The worried parents wasted no time heading to the sheriff's office in Waurika and reported their school-aged daughter missing. Gail told the police officer about yesterday's argument with Heather. According to her, she was outraged by the sky-high phone bill, which significantly hit the modest family budget, and even more so by the teenager's stubbornness, who flatly refused to admit she was wrong. The daughter spent a lot of time talking on the phone with friends, which, in the parents' opinion, far exceeded all reasonable limits. And although the father was more lenient in this situation, he still supported his wife's position. The sheriff tried to reassure the agitated parents. He suggested that this was most likely an ordinary runaway situation for a rebellious teenager, especially after an argument with her mother. But Gail objected. Such behavior was totally uncharacteristic of Heather. She was not used to running away from problems but usually tried to find an acceptable solution for everyone, even after conflicts. Unfortunately, this time, the mother was perhaps too impulsive, and the daughter was not restrained enough and could not admit her guilt. However, the police assured that most such situations resolve themselves. Teenage runaways usually come to their senses and return home. It was quite possible that Heather might already be home while her parents were at the station. The officers tried to cheer up Gail and Dwayne, assuring them that everything would be all right. They explained that for a girl to be declared missing, at least a day had to pass since her disappearance. Of course, at that time, this condition had not yet been met, so the police could not yet accept the statement and sent the parents home to wait for news from Heather. The disappointed Gail and Dwayne felt that something was wrong here and were convinced that something bad had happened to their daughter. They decided to start the search on their own. First of all, the couple began questioning the girl's inner circle and contacted several of her friends. Among those Heather's parents spoke to was 17-year-old Randy Wood, the captain of the school football team. In the past, he had dated Heather, but their relationship quickly ended, and the young people decided to remain friends. By the way, it was with Randy that the girl had talked up a hefty phone bill. When the mother of the missing girl contacted the boy, he assured her that he had no idea of Heather's whereabouts or what might have happened to her. Although his words sounded convincing, the loving mother couldn't shake the feeling that the young man was hiding something. It seemed as if he was repeating a learned story like a robot. In addition, Randy didn't seem at all worried about the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, which also alarmed the parents. However, it was not possible to expose the teenager in a lie, so Heather's mother decided to talk to another friend of hers, another 17-year-old high school student named Josh Bagwell. It was with him that the girl had recently started dating. When the woman called Josh, his grandmother answered the phone. She said the boy was resting after a party, and she didn't want to disturb him, to give him a chance to sleep it off. Therefore, the woman flatly refused to call her grandson to the phone. Josh's grandmother admitted that she was just cleaning up the trailer in their backyard where schoolchildren had partied the night before. When asked directly by the mother about the girl's disappearance, the elderly woman replied that she had not seen Heather. After that, the parents drove around the entire county in search of at least some clue as to their daughter's whereabouts. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain, and a whole day passed. Then the couple went to the police station again, and this time law enforcement finally joined the search operation. A week had passed since Heather's disappearance, until October 10th, but still no valuable information about the girl could be obtained. Given how much time had passed, there was little hope of finding the schoolgirl alive. Meanwhile, police patrols combed the outskirts on the border with Texas, hoping to find a trace of the missing girl. And then, in the river area, people noticed a body floating face down from the bridge, half submerged in the murky water. It was noticeable that the skin of the corpse was covered in mud, and it seemed as if someone had done it on purpose. The police assumed that in this way, someone was trying to hide the body against the backdrop of the muddy river. When divers pulled the gruesome find ashore, something much more horrifying was revealed under the layer of dirt. The victim was disfigured beyond recognition, her body was literally riddled with buckshot, it looked like she had been shot with a shotgun. In fact, the deceased was so disfigured that at first glance, nothing could be said for certain except her. A forensic examination was needed to establish her identity. In the end, experts were able to find out that the victim had been shot 9 times at close range, so the condition of the body was terrible, it was literally torn to pieces. 1 shot was to the back of the head, the other 8 to the back. At that time, Heather was the only person reported missing in the county, so her parents were called in for identification. They were able to identify their daughter by the ring on her finger, it was a name-engraved piece of jewelry given to her by her mother. This dispelled any doubts, the mutilated body on the autopsy table was Heather's. In addition, forensic experts found braces in the mouth of the deceased, which the girl wore to correct her bite. Dental records officially confirmed it was Heather Rich. The news of the death of the school cheerleader instantly spread through the town and by the next day had become the main topic of discussion. It took only a few hours for the entire population of the town to learn about the tragedy. On the same day, the terrible news was heard by Randy Wood, the football player who had recently dated Heather. This day was supposed to be special for him, it coincided with the annual game where Randy was once again to be chosen as the king of the game. It was expected that after the competition, the team would have a grand celebration, but now the boy was in no mood for fun. He was shocked by the news of his ex-girlfriend's death. Later, the young man even came to that fateful bridge and stared at the murky river waters for a long time. In fact, Randy knew a lot more than he had told the victim's parents. Soon the investigation led the police to the trail of this boy and several of his friends. This story was like the plot of a terrifying Hollywood thriller. One evening in the heart of a small Oklahoma town, 3 teenagers turned an ordinary night into a bloody revel. One was the son of wealthy parents, the second was the star and captain of the school football team, and the third was an aspiring street hooligan. As soon as the detectives took up the case, they first talked to the parents of the deceased. By that time, Heather's mother had already managed to call many of her daughter's friends and acquaintances. 2 young men fell under the woman's suspicion. The first was Randy Wood, Heather's ex-boyfriend, and the second was her current boyfriend, Josh Bagwell. The latter was supposedly sleeping off a party and didn't even call after learning of the girl's disappearance. Gail was convinced that these two were hiding something. It seemed as if the high school students were retelling the same learned story. Even the wording of individual phrases coincided, but the boys could not answer additional questions. For 2 teenagers, such behavior seemed strange. They were clearly too nervous when communicating and were reluctant to make contact, unlike other acquaintances of the victim who actively joined in the search for the missing girl. The mother felt that these 2 actually knew much more than they claimed in their telephone excuses. When talking to classmates and other friends of the deceased, the investigators received several signals that Josh and Randy were hiding something. The boys should have helped the police find out the circumstances of that fateful night when the schoolgirl ran away from home after an argument with her mother. Heather's closest friend said that the cheerleader was indeed going to a party that evening to see her boyfriend Josh. The girl was forbidden to leave the house late at night, but this did not stop the rebellious teenager. She waited for her parents to fall asleep, and around 11 p.m., she jumped out the window. There, the same suspicious pair of young men, both well known in the city and quite popular among their peers, were supposed to meet her. Josh was considered the son of wealthy parents, a rich man who always rode in the best cars and wore fashionable clothes. He loved to flaunt his family's wealth, confident that he would become their heir. The young man turned out to be a vivid representative of the golden youth, who cared only about his own popularity and money. In contrast to this boy, Randy Wood came from a simple family. But through tireless work and talent in sports, he managed to become no less popular than his wealthy friend. Randy was a handsome young man whom his friends simply adored for his virtuoso playing. He deservedly received the captain's armband and was truly considered the best player in the city and even became famous among school teams throughout the state. Randy and Josh were inseparable friends and usually spent weekends racing Josh's car on the dusty roads. Of course, girls often hung out in their company, and the young men constantly drank alcohol and sometimes smoked weed. There were few places for youth leisure and entertainment in the town, nothing much to do, so teenagers improvised as best they could. It is known that Heather Rich often joined their group. Her friend said that the girl also indulged in alcohol and weed, and on the night before her disappearance, she ran away precisely to hang out with the popular guys. This news shocked the parents of the young lady, who at 16 had embarked on such a slippery path. However, they were aware that their daughter was trying such things, albeit not in the company of young men. It turned out that back on September 27, 1996, 5 days before the cheerleader's disappearance, Heather herself and another girl from the support group were caught in the underside of the stadium. Grass and smoking paraphernalia were found on them. It also became known that the girl was drinking alcohol. As a result, she was suspended from school for 3 days. The parents were informed about the incident by the teachers. Of course, they did not hide their indignation, because they did not expect that their 16-year-old daughter would start such dangerous experiments. Heather admitted that she tried it out of curiosity and promised not to do it again. However, the parents were already more worried about why the girl had embarked on this wrong path at all. The attraction of the young straight-A student and athlete to alcohol and forbidden substances seemed frightening. The mother and father believed their daughter's assurances that she would stop doing it. But they never had a chance to verify whether she was telling the truth. Instead, bad habits could well have been directly related to her death. So the investigators turned to Josh and Randy, with whom the murdered schoolgirl was supposed to meet, hoping to find out the circumstances of the party on the eve of Heather's disappearance. The football team captain admitted that he and his friend had spent the entire evening in the trailer behind Josh's house, playing dominoes and drinking. However, both young men claimed that they had not encountered Heather that day. Interestingly, the police noticed the same nuance that alarmed the mother of the deceased. Both boys told exactly the same story, while speaking in an overly rehearsed manner, like robots, without any emotion, even though it was about the death of their mutual friend. All this made the cops suspect the young men of lying. The investigators suggested that the murder could have occurred out of jealousy when the teenagers did not share the girl among themselves. Of course, at that time, the detectives did not yet have irrefutable evidence that would link the suspicious young men to the crime. However, the high school students behaved extremely strangely, which aroused serious doubts among law enforcement about their non-involvement. Both young men became the main defendants in the case. It was necessary to check their biographies in more detail, their relationship with Heather, and the circumstances of the party arranged that fateful evening. The autopsy results gave completely new food for thought. First of all, the number of shots fired at the victim, namely 9. Even police shotguns usually hold only 8 rounds. Why reload the weapon to fire at least one more bullet when the person is obviously already dead? The second interesting nuance was the type of ammunition used against Heather. The killer loaded the gun with so-called Winchester buckshot, super-powerful cartridges whose lethal force was much greater than necessary for violence against a 16-year-old girl. However, in this case, this strange choice of the perpetrator allowed the cops to make the first significant discovery. Such cartridges were a real rarity, they were sold in only one store in town. The police checked the sales receipts and found out that shortly before the crime, the ammunition was purchased by only one person. The salesman looked at several photographs and recognized in one of them the young man whom the investigators suspected. It turned out that high school student Josh Bagwell had come into the store and bought a whole box of 20 rounds. According to the cashier, another man was with him. However, it was not his best friend Randy, but a certain Curtis Gambill, a person well known to the cops. Gambill turned out to be older than the other defendants in the case, he was already 19. Despite his young age, he had several arrests behind him. Curtis had spent most of his conscious life in various correctional facilities for juveniles. It is indicative that the guy was a completely inadequate character who was time and again caught behind the wheel while intoxicated. In addition, Gambill liked to shoot at dogs, horses, and even random passers-by with his gun. It was quite logical that Curtis became the main suspect in this case. After all, the other two boys, despite their strange behavior, had not previously had problems with the law and were generally not considered aggressive or dangerous individuals. On October 23, law enforcement officers visited the home of the juvenile offender in a neighboring town where he lived. But even more important, just a few kilometers from his house was the very bridge over the river under which Heather's body was found. The young man himself could not be found at home, but the police managed to talk to his grandmother. The woman willingly spoke about her grandson and, in particular, let slip that Curtis knew the area around the neighboring town very well, and was especially well oriented in the vicinity of the bridge near which the victim was found. It turned out that the grandmother had often taken little Gambill fishing in this very spot. So the suspect was much more closely connected with the crime scene than the cops had thought before talking to the old woman. The next day, the detectives were lucky enough to meet face-to-face with Curtis himself. The young man was detained and taken to the sheriff's office in Waurika. The interrogation lasted over 8 hours. Although the suspect said practically nothing to the investigators, he agreed to take a lie detector test. However, even this did not become the main value for the police. Most importantly, Gambill admitted that he had a rather rare Mossberg shotgun, whose peculiarity was a magazine for as many as 9 rounds. Thus, the detective suggested that they had found the owner of the probable murder weapon. Recall that Heather was literally shot with a rare gun of this type. When the weapon was seized and a ballistic examination was conducted, experts confirmed that the schoolgirl had been shot with this shotgun. After presenting Curtis with evidence of his involvement in the cheerleader's murder, the young man broke down. He told the police that he had involved his friends Randy and Josh in the crime. Later, Gambill wrote a detailed 2-page confession. So, 3 weeks after the girl's disappearance, law enforcement finally detained a suspect who admitted to the crime. Given the probable involvement of 2 other young men in the murder, Randy and Josh were also arrested and taken to the police station. There, the high school students were shown Curtis's testimony. He claimed that he wanted to kill Heather and was the initiator of the attack, but not the perpetrator. According to the confessor, he handed the weapon to his friend Randy and forced him to shoot the defenseless girl. And Josh was allegedly just with them for company. Despite this testimony, the investigators did not trust Gambill's words too much about the role of the football team captain in the crime. After all, Randy did not really look like a typical criminal. The young man had not previously had problems with the law, was an exemplary student and a promising athlete, a popular guy about whom no one spoke badly. Given the locations of the events, the party took place in southern Oklahoma, and the murder site is already in Texas. It was in the latter state that the young men faced a trial for a crime punishable by execution. And this became a real problem at the stage of the investigation. After all, according to Texas laws, the perpetrator of the crime could receive the death penalty, so none of the suspects wanted to take the blame. Eventually, under pressure from the police, Randy started talking during the second interrogation. He denied his involvement in the murder and claimed that Curtis had fired the shot and initiated the reprisal, and Josh had helped him. Meanwhile, Bagwell himself refused to cooperate with the investigation. In October 1996, law enforcement had 2 confessions that largely contradicted each other. In the end, the detectives decided that Randy's words were closer to the truth, and he also successfully passed a polygraph test. But one thing was obvious: the exact chronology of events on that fateful evening of October 2nd could never be reconstructed with 100% certainty, but they decided to rely on Randy's version. According to his testimony, that day the captain was going to drink with his friends Curtis and Josh. When everyone gathered, it became known that Heather Rich was also going to join them. The girl knew Josh and Randy well, but had never crossed paths with Gambill before, so she had no idea how dangerous this guy was. When the whole company gathered and drank a lot, Heather found herself on the verge of unconsciousness, however, like the rest of the partygoers. In a drunken haze, Curtis decided to take advantage of the cheerleader's helpless state and decided to have sex with her. According to Randy, during the harassment, Heather woke up and screamed, pushing the away, after which she fainted again. Although the girl could barely move her tongue, it could not be ruled out that when she sobered up, she would remember everything in detail. Gambill knew well that carries a serious prison term, and he did not want to end up behind bars. Therefore, he suggested simply getting rid of Heather. At first, the younger teenagers took his words as a bad joke, but Curtis was not joking. He really took a shotgun out of the car and pointed it at all 3 of them. Josh and Randy knew exactly who they were dealing with, so they decided not to argue. The guys loaded the drunk girl into the trunk of Josh's pickup truck, after which they headed towards Gambill's house. But before reaching the place, Curtis ordered to turn to the very bridge near which the mutilated body would later be found. He ordered to stop the car in the middle of the bridge, drag the unconscious Heather out of the trunk and put her on the edge of the railing. The terrified young men feared for their lives, so they were forced to obey. They really unloaded the schoolgirl from the pickup truck, but the girl was so drunk that she could not stand on her feet. So the young men put her on the ground, and they themselves returned to the cab. They had no idea what would happen next. Curtis approached the helpless Heather and began shooting her point blank. Randy managed to see a gruesome hole form where the girl's skull had been. After that, the boy covered his eyes with his hands and no longer dared to look in that direction. Gambill emptied the entire magazine of the shotgun. Then Curtis, together with Josh, threw the mutilated corpse into the river, got into the car and drove away. They saw with their own eyes what had happened to the young cheerleader, how cruelly the mad shooter had mutilated her. Both scoundrels were horrified by what they had done, so they decided to keep silent, especially since they themselves were now involved in the crime. In October 1996, all three defendants in the case were charged with the abduction and murder of 16-year-old Heather Rich. Of all the suspects, Josh Bagwell gave the investigators the most trouble, because he refused to provide any testimony and there was practically no direct evidence against him. So the prosecution had to rely on the words of the other two participants in the events, which contradicted each other. In the absence of direct evidence, the position of the prosecutor's office was not too reliable. To somehow solve this problem, the state prosecutor decided to offer Randy Wood cooperation with the investigation. As part of the proposed deal, the football team captain was to testify against Josh Bagwell. In return, the prosecutor guaranteed life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years of serving the sentence. Randy without hesitation agreed to such an offer. In addition, the prosecution representatives discussed with Heather Rich's parents the possibility of a life sentence for Curtis Gambill as well. They expected only a truthful confession from him, which, in the opinion of the deceased's relatives, was of much greater value than the death penalty for the juvenile initiator of the crime. Above all, the Rich family wanted to know the whole truth about those terrible events. On October 15, Curtis agreed to cooperate with the investigation and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the right to early release. Despite this, during the trial, Gambill continued to behave defiantly and inadequately. An incident involving him even occurred in prison while the investigation was ongoing. Once Curtis attacked a guard, knocked him down and began to strangle him. The aggressive young man could only be pacified by the efforts of several police officers. In February 1998, almost a year and a half after Heather's death, the trial of Josh Bagwell began. The case caused an extraordinary public outcry, which is why the number of people wishing to be present at the hearings was simply crazy. In the end, ordinary observers, and even members of the press were forbidden to be in the courtroom. The lawyers tried in every possible way to justify the actions of the defendants in the case. In fact, the defenders sought to denigrate Heather herself, calling her an alcoholic and a promiscuous woman who herself had Curtis, and then allegedly began to threaten everyone, because of which the older young man had to take radical measures and get rid of the girl. The parents had to prove to the jury that their daughter was not the way the defendants tried to portray her. In fact, Heather was an excellent student, an athlete and an extremely decent girl who accidentally got into the wrong company and ran into a dangerous criminal. When Curtis Gambill was given the floor, he unexpectedly returned to his initial version of events. Now he claimed that Josh had not participated in the crime at all and did not even know about the planned murder. Instead, according to Curtis, it was Randy Wood who fired the fatal shot. These statements greatly affected the team captain. However, instead of remaining silent, Randy took a desperate step. Right in the middle of the hearing, he refused the deal with the prosecutor's office. The young man did not want his confession to be interpreted as forced and dictated solely by the desire to save his own skin. Accusing others directly in the courtroom, Randy stated that he sought only one thing: to restore justice for the innocently killed girl. His act contradicted even the advice of his own lawyer. After all, despite the nobility of motives, from now on Wood faced the death penalty. But this step shocked Heather's parents the most. They personally met with Randy after the court hearing to talk face to face. The young man's bold and principled decision was of great importance to the Rich family. On February 10, Randy appeared before the jury and told his version of that fatal evening honestly and without embellishment. And the people in the hall believed him unconditionally. The football team captain described in detail the full participation of Josh Bagwell in the murder of Heather together with Curtis Gambill, as well as the role of his friend in the subsequent concealment of traces of the crime. On February 14, Curtis was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, as well as of committing premeditated murder. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment and an additional 99 years in prison. In May 1998, a public meeting of Heather's parents with Randy Wood took place, which was broadcast live. Despite the unbearable pain of losing their daughter, the rich couple was sincerely impressed by the honesty and sincere repentance of this young man. On August 7, 1998, the final court hearing in the case of Randy Wood took place. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 40 years of serving his sentence. This decision saddened many caring people, because among all the defendants, it was this young man who alone publicly repented of what he had done. He consciously risked his own life for the sake of the triumph of truth. Many believe that Randy did not deserve such a severe sentence. As for 16-year-old Josh Bagwell, he was also found guilty and sent to prison for life, without any prospect of early release. Interestingly, the boy ended up in the same correctional institution where Curtis Gambill was to serve his sentence. In January 2002, both conspirators made a daring nighttime escape from prison and hid for 10 days in the vast expanses of Texas. A nationwide alert was announced in the state. But the criminals were not destined to enjoy their coveted freedom for long. They were soon caught and returned behind bars to serve their life sentences. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.